to be communicated to all German troops as soon as possible. From the Commander-in-Chief, West. An important bridge across the Rhine has fallen into enemy hands without being damaged, despite the fact that all preparations for its demolition had been made. The 5 guilty officers were condemned to death by court-martial. Who does not live in honor will die in shame.
In the Second World War, of more than 40 bridges across the River Rhine, only one was taken intact by the Allies. The capture by American forces of the bridge at Remagen is an example of how success or failure in war often depend on the ability to grasp fleeting opportunity. Named after one of Germany's most illustrious generals of the First World War, and the prize and centerpiece of this action, the Ludendorff Railway Bridge crossed the Rhine at Remagen, where the river is some 700 feet wide. It had been built in 1916, with a total overall length of 1,069 feet, slightly longer than London's Westminster Bridge. At each end of the bridge, commanding the approaches and the surrounding landscape, were pairs of stone towers. Each of these castle-like structures had apertures for gun emplacements, and built into each one was ample provision for the accommodation of troops, the storage of supplies, and good observation for all-round defense. Looking south, Remagen is to the right, on the west bank of the Rhine, with the town of Erpel opposite, on the east bank, and the bridge spanned the two. Above the town of Erpel, a steep hill, the Erpel Allee, overlooked the bridge, and the railway went through the hill in a tunnel. From the hill above Erpel, we can see all there is of Remagen, a small country riverside town, except to those who live there, of no special significance. But ever since the 7th of March, 1945, a notable place name in the history of war. In order to understand the significance of the Remagen Bridge in the overall perspective of the Second World War, we should retrace our steps to the Allied landings in Normandy. After the Allied forces broke out from the Normandy beachheads in the summer of 1944, the most formidable obstacle between them and the heart of Germany was the River Rhine. Physically, a natural moat, designed as if by nature to secure the German heartland from the west. Along the banks of this great river are many of Germany's most important cities, and the industrial powerhouse of the Ruhr, finally dividing and flowing out into the North Sea by way of the Netherlands. And it was here that the first attempt was made to jump it. By September 1944, the British 21st Army Group had advanced through Belgium and crossed the Dutch border. Field Marshal Montgomery believed that here was his opportunity for decisive action. With a swift and concentrated airborne operation on a narrow front, he could strike hard and at once into Germany by seizing vital Rhine bridges in his sector. The plan was to drop paratroops 60 miles behind the German lines to capture bridges over the river, where it divided into the Lech, or Lower Rhine, and the Waal. With surprise on their side, the airborne forces were to take and hold the bridges at Arnhem, Nijmegen, and across the Maas north of Eindhoven, while ground forces raced forward to link up with them. The object was then to swing east and envelop the Ruhr. Well, as we all know, that bold operation to envelop the enemy in his own industrial heartland and maybe end the war in 1944 failed. At Arnhem, that was, alas, one bridge too far. What then? The American preference for a broad frontal attack prevailed. All the Allied armies were ordered to move steadily up along the entire length of the Rhine. Despite hard fighting throughout the winter, by early March 1945, they were all closing up to the river, preparing to form an unbroken line. Having done so, 2 major crossings were planned. The biggest was to be by Montgomery's 21st Army Group in the north, with a second major crossing by General Patton's 3rd Army in the south, with its flank protected by the American 1st Army, assigned to reach and hold the Cologne, Bonn, Koblenz sector of the river. The spearhead of the 1st Army was the American 9th Armored Division, made up of combat commands split down into separate task forces. Each task force had an armored element, plus infantry carried in half-tracks. Reach the Rhine, turn south, join up with 3rd Army, then consolidate. Those were the precise orders. No question of 1st Army's spearhead attempting to cross the river. That was to be 3rd Army's job. And in any case, the Germans would certainly blow all the bridges. As the US 1st Army pushed forward, one of Combat Command B's task forces, of almost brigade strength, was ordered to reach the Rhine at Remagen. In command was Lieutenant Colonel Leonard Engelmann.
On the afternoon of the 6th of March, we had reached the city of Stade-Meckenheim, which is about 15 miles west of the Rhine and west of the city of Remagen. At that time, I was ordered to continue to the city of Remagen. However, before we moved out of the city of Stade-Meckenheim, I received countermanding orders that we would remain at Stade-Meckenheim overnight. And I went down to the Combat Command B headquarters and received orders to move out at daybreak the next morning, and I was given the composition of my task force. The point company was Carl Timmerman, a lieutenant with the A Company of the 27th Armored Infantry Battalion. He was the point unit, followed by the platoon of tanks, commanded by Lieutenant Grimble. Then the 9th Engineers, commanded by Lieutenant Mott. Then the rest of the troops followed in line.
For most of that 15-mile approach march, they moved through open farming country, still much the same today. Small towns and villages, dangerous corners. Ever watchful for German opposition. Surprised it was so little. Only slight resistance. Occasional anti-tank and small arms fire. Tanks soon took care of that. Now, on the last leg, a pine forest. Ideal for ambush, so extra care. But no enemy to be seen. Breaking out of the forest onto high ground overlooking the Rhine, there, suddenly, a bridge. Incredibly intact. The day before the Americans advanced on Remagen, responsibility for that bridge had been given to the German Corps commander in the Remagen sector, General Otto Hitzfeld.
Man hat angenommen, dass die Vorbereitung.
One had assumed that the preparations on the bridge were under control, that it was ready for demolition once our troops had withdrawn across it. I was still fighting a rearguard action well to the west of the bridge when I received a telephone call informing me that a battalion had been ordered to its defense. But it turned out to consist of only 67 men, most of them sick and in no condition to fight. Since I suddenly found myself responsible for the Remagen Bridge, by the way, an insane decision, you don't put a commanding general in charge of a bridge while he is still far away from the place. I had to do something about it. My adjutant, Major Hans Scheller, offered his services. I ordered him to the bridge. His instructions were to keep it open so long as there was a chance for German troops to withdraw across it to the east, but to destroy it the moment the first American stepped onto it.
Wenn der erste Fuß der Amerikaner auf die Brücke kommt.
When we sighted the bridge, then I got a hold of the Major Devers, who was commanding the infantry battalion, and John Grimble, Lieutenant Grimble, and all the other commanders, and we formulated a plan of attack. I told the infantry to dismount and go down the hill toward Remagen on the left fast as possible because I was afraid the Germans would blow the bridge any minute. The easiest and fastest way was to go down the hill the way we were in column. But I did dismount the infantry and they moved into the town on foot. At the same time, the tanks were ordered to, and the rest of the infantry and half-tracks were ordered into the town on the regular road and to meet at the bridge. I asked the tank platoon commander to line up his tanks and to shoot across the bridge so the Germans wouldn't be able to get on it to destroy it.
Supported by the tanks, the infantry reached the western approach to the bridge by 1500 hours that afternoon. Suddenly, the enemy blew a large crater in the approach ramp. Operations officer to Colonel Engerman, Captain Cecil E. Roberts, was watching the action.
You could see the infantry start out very gingerly and very slowly out onto this bridge because, remember, we'd had bridges blown right in front of us before. They'd let you get right up to the approach and then blow the whole thing right in front of you. So we expected the bridge to be blown at any second.
The first man over was one of 2nd Lieutenant Timmerman's company, Sergeant Alex Dravik.
I got up out of the crater and all I said, boys, how many of you want to take the opportunity of going across, either get blown up with a bridge or shortening the war? We knew what, if we protected one another, we'd come through alive. So we started to cross this bridge zigzagging, so the snipers couldn't pick us off, which fortunately we could.
In the meantime, we had begun to fire smoke from the assault guns and the mortars into Erpel to try to give some protection because they were still under enough fire from the 20-millimeter flak guns and from the rifle and machine gun fire that was in the area to pin down infantry troops.
There was a sunken barge on our right, which would be on the south side. They had sniper fire coming from there, and from the hill, as we entered the bridge, they were firing from this hill down on us. Of course, they could only get so much of us of the bridge. And also from the town of Erpel, I think they had some anti-aircraft and artillery set up there, and they were firing from that direction also.
And about that time, as they were beginning to consolidate or to cross the bridge in numbers, Colonel Engman called for Lieutenant Mott, engineers, to come forward and check the bridge immediately so we could try to get our tanks across to support the infantry as soon as we could. And Lieutenant Mott passed in his Jeep with 2 sergeants and his driver, headed forward to do his work.
And his work was to remove the charges which might still blow the bridge sky high.
So not knowing what the condition was of the demolitions or anything else or what they had on it, we assumed that most of the charges were set up electrically, and our main objective and goal was to try to find out where the main line was if possible. But in proceeding across the bridge, certainly we were trying to destroy all the demolition we possibly could and cutting all the wires in sight that we could find at the present time, hoping we would run across what we thought was the main line.
Why was it the Germans failed to blow the bridge as ordered? Jakob Kleebach of the German Pioneer Corps was the bridge master.
I must go back a bit and explain. The explosives had to be brought some distance to Remagen because there was an order that explosives for main charges were not to be issued until the enemy was within 20 miles of bridges. It was my job to collect the explosives. When I arrived at the depot, none could be found. It had all vanished. I was then sent to another depot where I managed to collect 600 kilograms. But it was not the most powerful explosive. In addition, all available ammunition was used. That is, explosive charges from various locations packed into every available container and then got to Remagen. But it was still only half the amount that we really needed. However, by the morning of March 6th, these explosives were laid, and on the 7th of March, the bridge was ready for blasting.
no one ever will know why the electrical charges didn't go off. Sometimes, you know, just it could be a fault in putting the wiring together, or it could have been destroyed in the artillery fire and other shell fire. Some of the main lines could have been cut at that particular point, so I don't guess we ever will really know.
General Hitzfeld has his own views on the loss of the bridge.
Die Schuld dazu liegt in
The responsibility mainly rests with the High Command, who did not attach sufficient importance to the defense of the bridge. The troops were not to blame. Troops suitable for its defense should have been sent to Remagen in good time. They were not, because the High Command thought the Americans would go for Bonn instead. There was also a breakdown in communication. Major Scheller lost his radio link. Therefore, Remagen was not defended in a manner in which it should have been in that situation.
bereit gewesen, wie es der Lage entsprechend hätte sein müssen.
If the demolition of the Remagen Bridge had gone according to the German plan, the American infantry could well have been blown to pieces as they crossed. They took that chance, and in ordering them to do so, Colonel Engerman and his immediate superior, Brigadier General Hogue, took a great risk too. They ignored the Allied plan and exceeded their orders, knowing that whatever bridgehead they might establish on the other side could well be wiped out by enemy counterattack. They took that chance too, and succeeded, triumphantly. Within 3.5 hours, Supreme Allied Headquarters had been informed, and despite the master plan, the main thrust of the United States First Army was changed. Within 36 hours, and while the bridgehead was still operationally under the same combat command which took the bridge, no less than 18 infantry battalions from 3 different infantry divisions, as well as armor and artillery, were pushed across the Rhine at Remagen. Everything the Americans could lay their hands on was switched to follow up and cross. No question now of just wheeling south and joining up with Third Army, who were still preparing to cross the river in the south according to the original plan. General Eisenhower made the ultimate decision, the decision to expand the bridgehead and push everything he could across in the Remagen sector. The Germans eventually threw everything they could at the Americans on the bridge and in the expanding bridgehead. Despite incessant enemy shell fire, they rapidly constructed 2 pontoon bridges as well. And 10 days after its capture, the old bridge just simply collapsed. Weakened and worn out, not only by the weight of the traffic the American First Army pushed across it, but by the reverberations of constant gunfire, aerial near misses, and even the explosion of V-2 rockets in its vicinity. There had not been a single American casualty in the actual crossing of the bridge. But when it collapsed, 10 men were killed, 18 reported missing, presumed drowned, and more than 60 injured. The bridgehead soon built up to a strength of 4 divisions. There was strong enemy counterattack. But the bridgehead held. And within a week, the Americans were able to mass 25,000 combat troops over on the east bank of the Rhine. The success at Remagen is an object lesson in the flexibility of high command to grasp quickly a totally unexpected opportunity. It is also an outstanding example of initiative on the part of junior officers. And what overall effect did the capture of the bridge at Remagen have on the final outcome of the war? The Chief of Military History, United States Army, Brigadier General James L. Collins.
Now, what the Remagen bridgehead did was it made our later crossings by Montgomery in the north and Patton in the south easier, because Remagen acted as a magnet to pull German troops into it, so that when Montgomery and Patton crossed a little while later, the resistance was much less because they just didn't have that many troops there. I suspect that it probably may have shortened the war by perhaps a week. And so you could say that you saved a week's worth of casualties by that action, and probably the casualties that were incurred in crossing both north and south were slightly less than would otherwise have happened. So I think in conclusion you could say it didn't affect the strategy, it did affect the way, the tactics, if you will, that we went about the defeat of Germany, and it saved a number of casualties. Probably its biggest effect, though, was psychological morale. It encouraged the Allies and it discouraged the Germans.
Today, all there is to remind us of this feat of arms are the towers which once supported the bridge. They are maintained as a memorial to the dead of both sides.